So I'm John Jackson. I get called JJ a lot. That's fine. And as far as my background, I'm a Silicon Valley guy. Started out in the semiconductor business in the 80s and thought that was the center of the earth. Had a good time there in a variety of roles. Typically, I was a VP of sales and marketing. I did a tour on Wall Street after that, and I learned about greed with a capital G. And if you saw The Wolf of Wall Street, yeah, it was kind of like that, actually. And truly, I was a Boy Scout amongst gangbangers, is the truth. And from there, I did a series of startups. I got involved with the university as a guest speaker about 20 years ago. And lo and behold, today I'm a full-time professor with Philip, the founder of the Incubators. And then I'm also the founder and manager of Titan Angels, which is an angel investment fund. So the purpose of today's talk is specific to presenting to an investment panel, and those words are used to describe the pitch that you would make to an investor group, and that would be like a angel network or a VC. And there's frankly a kind of a specific formula that those investors are looking to hear you touch upon, and mostly that's what I'm going to talk about today. I encourage you to ask questions along the way and interrupt me, and if you'd like to argue with me, that would be fun as well. But let me say that the goal when you're pitching to an investor group, there are actually two. One is to be remembered, and the second is to get to the next meeting. So what happens at a angel network, there's a very large one in our area called Tech Coast Angels, TCA. They have 6 different chapters, many hundreds of angel investors. And on a day where there's a screening, as they call it, there'll be a series of entrepreneurs who'll come in and make their pitch. And they're typically in 15-minute sessions where you tell your story and then you get asked questions. The hard part when you're listening to those pitches is recalling things that were said, etc. So the more you can pitch in such a fashion to answer their questions, I think the better off you're going to be. When you think of your audience, it's going to have a mixed bag of people, and they all have different categories and names: seed investors, angel investors, private equity, VC, and bankers. And to a degree, they're looking for similar information, although the investment mindset of a seed investor is very different from a VC. And then a banker is a different thing entirely. I'd like to talk just a little about the soft skills, and this is pretty simple stuff, but let's start there. So when you show up to do a pitch, you got to be ready. And oftentimes the welcome you'll get from these investor groups is rather abrupt. But if there's a chance to say hello, to hand out your business cards, and to thank them for the opportunity, of course you should, right? They'll let you know quickly what the culture and protocol is. When you're talking, this is some basic Toastmasters things, but most of your communication, they say 70% of communication is nonverbal. And most of that is with eye contact. Hard to do on Zoom, mind you, but in person, making eye contact across the room, and if it's at all possible, you make eye contact with everybody there. Contain your hands. Some of us are naturally expressive, and in a stand-up presentation, a more reserved posture and demeanor is kind of the way to go. With your voice, you want to be heard, and you want to speak in a rhyme and a rhythm that is easy to listen to, but it's not monotone. So you want to vary your inflection, vary your volume. And my other advice is use real words. Sometimes when you get in front of a group to make an argument, a pitch, or sales presentation, we'll reach for words that we never use in real life. And I would say, use the words that you would at Starbucks if you're having a cup of coffee with a friend, and nothing more complicated than that. By the way, on the subject of jokes, I mean, I love a joke as much as anyone. I can tell you it is so easy to offend people these days. I would say just proceed with caution. Beware what you say. I also don't recommend laser pointers, for the record, because we're unaccustomed to using them. And it's kind of like from Star Wars when you use them in the room. By the way, if a panelist, someone on the panel, an investor, interrupts or disagrees with you, let them have their say. That's okay. The last thing you want to do is be argumentative. In most cases, the best response is, "That's an interesting point. May I get back to you later?" There's also something that happens in almost all type of stand-up presentations. You walk up to the front of the room, you make the presentation, and you go, "Oh my God, I forgot to say this." Well, conveniently, in an investor pitch, there's a question and answer period. And what I recommend you do is, when you remember what you didn't say, you're in a position to do something like, "Oh, one thing I neglected to mention is blank, blank, blank." And you covered your bases. Easily done. So there's always enough time. Let's talk a little about types of presentations. Now, this presentation is text only, and you can see it's a small font, and it's very difficult to read. And so this is one you don't want to use. So text-heavy presentations honestly don't communicate well, other than after the presentation is over, and by chance someone would want to go back and read it. Otherwise, these should be avoided. This guy, remember him? He was famous for doing a presentation where he would stand in front of the image. Do you remember that? And you've maybe seen the movie Jobs. And what did he say? Because there was nothing printed on his slides, and he was such a powerful presenter. But typically he was getting a couple of simple points across. Now, the problem with this type of PowerPoint style is, after the fact, it doesn't have much of a memory. You know what I mean? And it's for this reason that I think most of us who are not named Steve Jobs should use what I call a leave behind presentation, which is a combination of images and bullets. So it's text and data, could be video. I would recommend, no more than 5 bullets with 5 to 7 words per line. And so what happens is, after your presentation, they can go back through the PowerPoint and recall certain things you've said. It just communicates well, in my opinion. Now, one thing, when you're presenting to an investor group, knowing that you want to be remembered and you want to get to the next meeting, is you have to beware of not being a fire hose. And this is particularly difficult for someone who's in love with their idea, and also the technical person, technically inclined, to dwell on the idiosyncrasies of the product. So instead of being a fire hose of information, how about you consider yourself a drinking fountain, where you give them a taste to get them interested to help you get to that next meeting. And I refer to that as progressive disclosure. That makes sense? Now, the typical investor panel is going to have 15 minutes of presentation, and then that's followed up for 15 minutes of questions. Now, one of the beauty of pitching an idea, a business plan, is you, in all probability, will get multiple opportunities to present. And so, you know, it's not uncommon for your first few presentations to maybe be kind of rocky. Not only you becoming comfortable with the material, you didn't know what questions were going to be asked of you. Well, after you've got a few presentations under your belt, you can start to prepare for those questions and respond in a more convincing manner. So I said that there was kind of a traditional presentation algorithm or formula, and this is more or less it. And as you can see, it's about 12 slides. Knowing that you've got 15 minutes, that's just a little over a minute a slide, which is not very much time. Some of the angel groups, sometimes a VC, they'll cut you off. You hit their time limit, you're done. And then you go to Q&A. And that can be awkward. And in fact, some of the different angel groups have a 12-minute rule. So that's something you might want to find out in advance. So let's walk through a prototype presentation. So there's an introductory slide, and that basically has your company name, your logo. It may have your name as the presenter, and you could have a one-sentence description, you know, 5 or 7 words, and basically you got to get right to it. This is just the lobby of your presentation, the front door, right? Pretty simple. Next, the expectation is you're going to talk about the problem, could be an opportunity that you've identified, and whatever that is, here's the problem as you see it, and here's how it's being handled today. Note that's only a minute, not very long at all. If you can give an example, that would be optimum. Next, of course, comes your solution. So, all right, so now you understand there's a problem. Let's talk about how you're going to fix it, how you're going to remove the pain, give people pleasure, whatever that might be. If you can describe some real-world applications, that will enhance things. And you need to be candid about your solution. Where are you? You're in beta, you have yet to go to production, you're in revenue, or whatever that is, to just calibrate the investor group on your status. Next, there's some argument over order, so there is no perfect order, but let's talk about the marketplace. Is the market that you're solving a problem in, is it growing? Is it a big industry? Is it maturing? Kind of what's going on in that community? You're trying to explain why this makes business sense to the investor, and they would be very interested to know who your optimal customer really is. So probably the biggest mistake that you could make as a presenter is to say that everybody's going to want your product. Truth is, they're getting along just fine right now without you. But of that big herd of potential customers, there's a strong argument that there's a segment who really is going to value what you want. Well, let's talk about that particular segment. This is a slide that I recently added to this pitch deck, and it's why now. When you think about it, timing can be critical to a new venture. You could be too early. You could also be too late. So talk about what's happening. They describe it in this slide. I describe it in this slide as a category in your industry. So what's going on that says that coming up with a new startup, a new idea is going to get traction now, right? Competitive landscape and competitive advantage. Lately, the use of a grid that shows your offering versus competitors or near competitors with the check marks, that is very, very powerful. And it can describe how you're similar but different to the competition. And it allows you to describe that that difference is your competitive advantage. And that difference is these check marks, and this is how you're different, if not better. For an investor who want to put money into your venture, there's got to be a reason. So why should they do this? Again, they're looking for a significant return. You know, the typical angel or VC, when they put $1 in your venture as an investor, they'd really like to see 10 times or more return in 5 to 7 years. So if they give you $100,000, invest, they become a part owner, they're looking for $1 million back. And that's because when they invest in a dozen or 2 dozen ventures, the likelihood that many of them are going to fail or fail quickly is actually pretty high. So the ones that make it, they want to hit a home run on. Next is the business model. Not too subtle. It's how are you going to make money, right? And by the way, I should differentiate here. So a business model is how you're going to make money, ultimately profit, and that's going to be sustainable over time. The revenue model, well, that's how you create revenue right now. And so examples of that could be a transaction when you buy on Amazon. It could be a subscription like with Netflix. It could be an auction environment like at eBay. So there are many types of revenue models. And so your pricing is a critical component of that. And there's always going to be CFO types in the room who will ask probing questions about your pricing model, how you came up with it, what are the margins. So be prepared to answer those. And then finally, you know, your go-to-market strategy. Well, this slide is difficult to present in a minute 30. There's no doubt. But you basically want to convince the audience that you know how to make money with this product in this market. Another slide that's increasingly important, and that is the current status. The angels will refer to this as traction. So if you're an early stage company, you don't have any customers yet, you're still trying to figure things out, you don't have much traction. So traction is proof that your venture is going to go places. Proof of concept is evidence that the dog is going to eat the dog food. So think about that. So you got this really cool solution to a problem. But what evidence do you have? Is it going to work? So evidence could be trials. It could be orders if you've got them. It could be people doing evaluations of your product, etc. So proof of concept is super important to the investor. IP status, you know, have you got provisional patent application? Are you pursuing a patent, etc.? Customers and wins. And so again, this is, if you think about it, this slide is all about evidence that your business is gonna go places. financial projections. So I'll stop for a second and say, if there are controllers, financial analysts, CFOs in the room, you will never make them happy because they need spreadsheets, they need detail, they need data, and you've got it, okay? But you're going to give it to them later. And so today is just to give a kind of a pro forma outlook of how the company's going to grow to the best of your knowledge. Now, who's kidding who? Estimates and pro formas are guesses, but they're educated guesses. And given the cunning and daring of the management team, the fit of the solution to the marketplace, a little bit of luck, and then your money, Mr. and Mrs. Investor, this is how we're going to grow, right? And so I've got a visual here. It's kind of simple. And so this is kind of a high-level overview of a P&L, 3 years, pardon me. And then you want to describe, let me take some water here. There are oftentimes some basic assumptions that go in your financials that don't speak for themselves. So it's not unusual for the founders in the company not to take salaries the first year. Quite possibly you're working virtually, so there's no rent. And then in fact, revenue is planned to kick in the second quarter. So you want to just spell a few of those out that you think are important. Now you'll find certain investors prefer actually a 5-year outlook, which is easily doable. And in fact, if you think about it, you could extend this forever, right? I think the typical investor acknowledges that 3 years is a lifetime in a startup, and that somewhere as you head towards year 5 in a pro forma financial statement, the numbers become a little less reliable because you just don't really know. So generally speaking, 3 years is going to be acceptable. Hugely important is actually you. And so it's often said that the investor will invest in the jockey rather than the horse. So the jockey in this case is the management team, the horse is the product or the company. And so your fit with this company is a critical piece of information to include. So it's not that you're the CEO, it's why are you a good CEO for this company? What are your credentials? What's your industry experience? Why are you a good bet? And that applies for your entire team. Now, it's not uncommon for a management team to be incomplete, right? So it might be you as CEO, you might have a CTO, but you don't have a chief marketing officer. Guess what? That's what you say. And you come clean and say, well, we think we've got a good foundation, but we need help finding that right chief marketing officer. And we're hoping our investors can help us. That is very, very welcome. And by the way, your advisory board can bring great credibility to the process. So if you're an LLC, you're not required to have an advisory board. You're not required to have a board of directors. When you're an S Corp or a C Corp, you're going to be mandated to have a board of directors. But with that said, any startup can have an advisory board. And certainly you want one advisor. Maybe you want 2 or 3. And these would be typically senior people that have experience and contacts that you don't. And so they can bring great credibility to the presentation. By the way, if you're making a presentation, showing up with your team rather than just yourself, highly recommended. And if you have an advisor or advisors, have them tag along too. It's very impressive. This slide's pretty damn important, and that's what's in it for the investor. So, what type of money are you looking for? And how are you going to use the money, right? How much? And if you're looking for $500,000, what percent of the company are you offering to that investor? And they're breaking out their calculators as you start talking. So they're trying to figure out, well, if I give you $500,000 and you're offering me 20% of the company, and your sales are this, what type of return am I going to get? And by the way, to get, and I said it already, a 10 times return is kind of typical expectations in that 5+ year range. But the only way they get it, the only way they get their ROI, their return on investment, is if there's an exit. And so an exit would be a merger or an acquisition where you sell your company. It could be a bankruptcy, God forbid, but it does happen. That's an exit. Or if you go public. So although there are other variations, that's essentially how the investor gets their money back. And it's not unusual for them to have to wait. They're not a patient group of folks, but they realize that the startup that's going to scale and do well is going to take time. So now you're quickly approaching that 15-minute time frame. And if there's time, you restate the obvious. You thank the audience and basically say, if there's one thing you want to remember about our startup today, this is it. And then you close the presentation and you open yourself up to questions, right? Pretty simple. So that formula is pretty much expected by any investor group. And if you follow that, you're going to answer most of their questions. Now, I've got a hot tip for you. So now that you've made this presentation a few times, you understand that these different slides or topics have created a need for in-depth answers to questions. So what you do is on the back end of your deck, you have this all set up. And so maybe in your presentation, you address the why now, but then you have a later slide that has more detail, more evidence of why this is important. So I have seen this by presenters, and usually, so it's at the end of the question, end of the presentation, and the investor will say, well, I don't quite understand your business model. And you respond by saying, well, I'm glad you've asked that question. Let's look at it in more depth. Click, click, click. You go to that slide that says business model, and you give them more of the information they're looking for. It is so powerful, and it's completely fair to have this ready to go. So you meet the minimum on the front end of your presentation, but if you get hammered with tough questions, you're prepared to answer them and answer them well. By the way, incubators, we hear one from EvoNexus, a few from Cal State Fullerton. They can be great help to a startup. I encourage you to consider it. And one of the reasons is that when a startup is in an incubator, it says something about the startup. It says that they're intelligent, they're coachable, and they know that they need help. And I've had numerous investors say when they see a startup that has been engaged or is engaged in an incubator, their impression of the startup improves or goes up in effect, the actual valuation of the startup goes up. By the way, Titan Angels LLC is an early stage investment firm. We're relatively new. We've been around a little less than 3 years. We have invested in 16 startups, and we're looking for a scalable venture, founders of outstanding character. So no drug lords or gun runners or anything like that, but rather good people who want to make the planet a better place. And we're looking for startups that are on the cusp of going to revenue. They've got traction and they've got a competitive advantage. That's my horse, George. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Visit my website. These are a few of my books. Please buy my books. You can email me. I'd be happy to engage conversation that way, or you can just call me. So, Philip, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you very much, JJ. I appreciate that. I know it's been really good for a lot of other people too. Looks like Hassan had a question. If there's another presenter, when would that person come in and how would we do that transition?
So a second person from your team, would that be correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can do it, all right? 15 minutes goes very quickly. And so I would make sure you're rehearsed about who's going to cover what slide or slides. If you do the transition, it might be something like, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our CFO, Hassan. Hassan is going to be talking about the financials. Hassan. And then Hassan comes up and says, hello, my name is Hassan, and I'm going to talk about financials. So your audience can easily get confused with names and things like that. Now that little protocol of the handoff, the introduction, says it all. You got to move quickly, but eloquently. So it is possible. I as a professional listener in a pitch environment, it is acceptable to have more than one presenter for a pitch, but you got to beware of making it too crowded. So probably not more than two, would be my take.
Yeah. And I have also seen that in the Q&A, especially when it comes down to the financials. That's also a great time to bring up the CFO to discuss the financials at that point. So yeah, we're open to other questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat window.
This is Fred here.
Hey, Fred.
A quick question. So how common is it for investors to interrupt you during your pitch such that you don't get a chance to finish the key?
You know, great question. And normally I would say they'll give you that courtesy.
Okay.
Right. There are some people who just can't help themselves.
Sure. Sure.
Who want to offer their opinion or insight. But I would say more typically, if you get interrupted, it's a clarification question where you put something on the screen or say something, and at that moment, it doesn't make sense or there's some confusion. So there is an opportunity to correct that on the spot. So I would welcome it. Mm-hmm. And again, the visualization that I try to use as a speaker and as I coach others in this process is to talk like a human, right? To think of yourself having a conversation at a table at Starbucks and you're enthusiastically sharing an idea. And so wouldn't it be normal for someone to ask you a question? Well, sure. It would. Yeah.
So I guess the takeaway would be that if they do that, that shows they're engaged. And kind of like when you're doing a informal presentation, the more they engage with you, the better it is because they're kind of leading it, right, in a way.
Spot on. So
Yep.
This is sales 101.
Right.
Is if you're making a pitch, and nobody has any questions, usually it's not a good thing.
Right. That sounds great.
So I would welcome interruptions.
Sounds great.
If I could, thanks very much for the information. How do you think these kind of pitches are changing or will change? And I know it's speculation in a COVID or post-COVID world. Do expectations change? History of what we did during the COVID period, is that relevant at all? And do you think that we should be thinking about how we change in the future?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In fact, the angel group that I mentioned, Titan Angels, had a meeting today, and we were talking about COVID-19. And what that means in the short run is we're not practicing face-to-face screenings. And, investors do want to get to know you. And so a face-to-face meeting, I would say, in other environments is mandatory. They won't invest from a mail-in pitch or something like that. Now, the role of video conferencing, the role of a produced video takes on new meaning, though, in this environment. So if face-to-face is best, what we're doing right now is second best, and does work. Okay. I'm also a professor at the university, and I have the same issue with my students right now. And so I've challenged them to create short videos to effectively pitch their idea. And that's subject to your videography skills, your creativity, but that could be, again, a second best substitute. I don't know if I'm entirely answering your question.
No, I appreciate it. So the 15 minutes, if we had a minute and a half introduction, looking at the video screen, would that be kind of seen as, in your opinion, as being like overstepping what we're here to do because we're not here to sell our product, or it's part of the pitch and it would be appreciated?
Yeah, I think it'd be part of the pitch. And, if you went to a link and played a video, it could quickly say what might take you 5 minutes to describe too, right?
Yeah.
So video can be very, very powerful. The use of testimonials, by the way. So the investor wants evidence that you've got traction. Well, if you had third parties saying in your video, look at how I use this product and boy, do I love it, that's very powerful.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, JJ, we do have a couple questions in the chat window. Vinay asks, should extended version of the pitch deck be considered the same as investor due diligence materials?
So investor due diligence. So what does that mean? Well, that's when the investor says, I'm interested and I want to dig deeper into your business. And there is a file that they're going to ask for, and it's called a data file. All right. So what's in the file? Well, it's everything. It includes your pitch deck. It includes all of your financials. It includes all of your resumes for the team and for the advisory boards. It includes your business plan. It includes schematics. So think about it. In one spot, usually on Dropbox, you share this file with the investors in an attempt to answer any question they might have, to help them satisfy that they truly understand you and the business and its potential. So the questions at the end of this deck, yeah, that's helping them a bit with their due diligence, sure, right? And so for the investor to invest in you, there's essentially got to be total transparency. You got to lay it all out on the table and help them decide whether your business is going to be a fit for their money. And you don't want to waste their time or your time. So the transparency is really a good thing. And by the way, investors say no most of the time. It's because they typically have very specific investment criteria, and they're trying to figure out through the Q&A period, your presentation, through the data file, if you fit their investment objectives. They might quickly discern that. So if they tell you no, don't take it personally. They just are making a decision about how to invest the money. Now, oftentimes you'll get a brush off that's something like, well, you're too early for us. Why don't you come back in 6 or 9 months? Now that sounds like the brush off, but 6 or 9 months from now, you might have more traction, might have more people on the team. You might very well be more investable at that time to that group of investors. So listen carefully to what they say.
All right, great. Let's see, we have another question here from Hassan. Considering the current economic slump that will likely go into 2021, do you anticipate a slowdown or complete stop of startup investments?
Sad response is yes. So if you look after 2008, investment capital did dry up for a while. And how would I describe this? The good deals got funded anyway, okay? But the investors were careful about where they invested. I think it's easy to say at this point in time that the precipitous drop because of COVID-19 is more significant than what we saw in 2008. I think most of us would agree. Now, will the recovery be a deep V and bounce back quickly? I don't know that. It could. I would say that money's going to be tough to get for certainly the next 6 months. And if you're an investor and you've invested in 15 different startups already, you have a difficult assignment to figure out who you're going to put additional funding in. So of the 15 startups, which ones can you, they call it's seed and feed would be the expression. So who are you going to go back and help get through what is a difficult period? So I tell you, I think it is a most unusual time, and investors are wondering what they should do with their money. The expression is keeping their powder dry. I don't know if you've heard that expression. Just making sure that they can take advantage of opportunities. This opportunity will transform itself. I think that startups that are at play right now need to take a hard look at their business models and what they're doing, and maybe pivot and reinvent themselves. This is the professor talking here for a second. But for instance, there are fast food restaurants who have made sandwiches, and so they're in the sandwich business. Well, actually, no, they're not. They're in the business of providing sustenance to people and food. And so that same retail outlet, that same staff could make sandwiches now to be takeout only, or they could deliver groceries, as an example. So they could expand their business model to adapt in this difficult time. So at some point in time, with this kind of bleak outlook, I think you have to reinvent yourself. And I think, Vinay, you were targeting the venues, right? Where people are going to come for entertainment, for music. Well, that's kind of on hold.
Yeah,
I don't know what you think, but it's going to be like next year, right?
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, so you're early stage, so you could pivot, all right? So what could you do with your knowledge of this entertainment industry to provide value and get compensated for it?
Yeah, and I also like to add in, you know, this is always a great opportunity to look at some other things at play. As we can see, Zoom is widely popular. App ordering software for restaurants is hugely popular. There's always a market, and just looking at those different opportunities, this could actually be a really great time for your business.
Yeah, I tend to be a positive person, and my view of the world is, wow, there's incredible opportunity right in front of us, and it may require a pivot, a change of clothing, a redesign, a rebranding, but there's going to be a recovery, and there's going to be a great chance to help people provide value and make money, and why not us, right?
All right, great. So again, JJ, oh, I'm sorry, was there another question?
If we need to close out, then we can just close out, but I did have a question.
No, please.
What am I going to do?
No.
Okay,
Go ahead, Adrian.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks for the talk, JJ. Appreciate it. So I have had many investors say that I should not email my pitch deck to investors I have not met before. Is there a philosophical reason behind that?
Yeah, I can tell you that Tech Coast Angels, as an example, says their website receives about 1,000 pitch decks a year. And so how many pitches do they actually hear? I hear the numbers around 80 or so. And how many do they actually invest in? Maybe 10 to 15. So it would be better for you to get introduced to the investor. And, you know, angel investors are everywhere. They're at different events. And of course, they're now virtual now. But if you can meet someone and have someone function as your sponsor, the likelihood that you're going to get a chance to pitch and go through the screening process goes way up. So it is kind of a mammalian experience. So I've heard other examples. So there's a very famous venture capital firm called Kleiner Perkins up in the Bay Area, right? The numbers I heard from them is they get 12,000 business plans sent to them on their website every year. And they literally screen them out by just looking at the front page, and they get them down to a few hundred. And then they screen them from there, and then they invest in like 15 or 20. So the odds are in your favor if you have someone escort you in. Yes.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Another question, if I could. Is there value in the pitching in this area in life sciences or versus tech? So looking for a group that's focused and experts in certain areas where maybe in Boulder, Colorado, or Austin, Texas, it's a little different than in this Orange County or larger area.
Yeah, I can tell you that different investor groups, funds have different criteria. As an example, it's not uncommon for investors to say that I want to invest in companies that are local, all right? Now, the reason is that many investors want to have a chance to go to the bricks and mortar facility if there is one. They want to have the opportunity to meet face to face, and certainly a local investment would fit that. Other investors only invest in certain sectors. There are VC funds that only invest in food products. There are, EvoNexus, right, as an incubator prefers tech. And so there is specialization out there. And usually you can figure that out pretty quickly in a few conversations with the investment group or even their website. They'll say what they do. And so if you're a certain type of company, you're an AI company in med tech, well, a little bit of homework on your end can help you discern which investors out there have an affinity for what you're doing. You don't want to waste your time or their time, right?
Thanks.
Okay, other questions? All right, with that, again, I want to thank you, JJ. You're welcome to give a clap, or I think we also have that little feature on our chat window here for a little clap.
Thank you.
If you have further questions about the incubator or starting a business, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer your questions. Again, our Cal State Fullerton Startup Incubator is open to people in the public as well. And we would like to help a lot of different startups. So please let me know if we can be of assistance, and we'll be in touch.
And Philip, if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, it's my pleasure. It's my gift to you for attending tonight. And likewise, if you have any questions, you want to reach out to me, I'd pick up the phone, or I'll answer the email, I promise.